11 days to go, and it's still not over. When Rishi Sunak called the election, everybody said it was the biggest gamble of his political life. I don't think he realised that he wasn't the only one who'd been down at the bookies. Really not what he needs this morning, yet more allegations that top Tories placed bets on the date of the election. More questions about Labour's real intentions, but Keir's keeping stum. As Napoleon said, why interrupt your enemy while he's making a mistake? No MPs, no manifesto, no allies. It's 8 years to the day since his great Brexit triumph. Yet from Clapton to Kiev, everyone's talking about Nigel again. Home Secretary James Cleverly is up for the Conservatives after another miserable week for the Prime Minister and his party, facing derision from outside over the betting scandal and despondency from within as the looming electoral catastrophe seems ever more certain. Bridget Phillipson is the Shadow Education Secretary as Labour looks nailed on to form the next government. There's important scrutiny to have of its plans for tax and spending. Sharon Graham is the General Secretary of the country's biggest union, Unite, the only one that didn't endorse Labour's manifesto. She's telling Rachel Reeves to spend and borrow more, with a stark warning for what could happen if she doesn't. But it's nothing like the divisions in the Conservative Party, which looks ready to tear itself apart after what could be a disastrous election result. Who would lead the party and in which direction? I'll speak to former Immigration Minister Robert Jenrick. Plus, with us throughout the show, a trio of distinguished insiders. The former editor of the Financial Times, Lional Barber. The former Labour advisor, Sonia, Sodha. And the former number 10 Communications Director, Guto, Harri. Welcome to Sunday Morning with Trevor Phillips. When they come to write the history of this campaign, they might call it the friendly fire election. The principal contenders for number 10 are getting more heat from their own side than from their opponents. In this programme, the boss of Britain's biggest union puts Keir Starmer on notice. Loosen the spending taps or get ready for trouble. And J.K. Rowling, who handed Labour £1 million under Gordon Brown, said yesterday that she couldn't vote for a party that was dismissive of women or a leader who prevaricates and patronises. Rishi Sunak, struggling to escape the shadows of Boris Johnson and Liz Truss, now has to explain why members of his own entourage were busy betting on the election date, and contenders to succeed him are already charging out of the closet. It must be a relief for Starmer, Sunak and Ed Davey to have Nigel Farage as a target, but their chorus of condemnation plays to a classic Farage theme. They're all the same. He's the only one who tells the supposed truth. Actually, the Reform leader is obviously having fun, and why not? He's come from nowhere to double-digit ratings, and you couldn't buy the publicity he's getting. I'm sure they'll be paying attention in both Moscow and Mar-a-Lago. Well, a little earlier, I spoke to the Home Secretary and Conservative candidate for Braintree, James Cleverly. James Cleverly, did your aide, James Sunderland, tell you that he thought the Rwanda plan was crap before he said it?
So I saw that headline, I was quite surprised, because I know James had been very supportive both of me personally and of the policy. And of course, I've had a conversation with him, and I've also heard the recording. And it's clear what he's doing is he's putting forward a very counterintuitive statement to grab the attention of the audience.
Yeah, it's pretty counterintuitive to say your government's flagship policy is crap.
But if you actually listen to what he then went on to say, he was saying that the impact, the effect is what matters. And he went on to say that the deterrent effect we've seen working in Australia, which has an analogous policy. He also said that when the first flights take off, it will send a shockwave, his words, a shockwave across the channel, sending a very, very clear message to the people smugglers and the people putting themselves in the hands of people smugglers. So what we've seen actually is, I mean, he did it clearly for dramatic effect to grab the attention of the audience, but he is, and it's clear in the recording, completely supportive of the deterrent effect that Rwanda policy has.
Are you sure? Because there's another way of interpreting exactly what you've just said, which is that his first reaction was his real reaction, and then what he then went on to explain is how the government justifies it, which is a whole different story. And the reason I'm asking you that is that we wonder whether he was talking for himself or whether he was talking for you as well, because it is also reported, or is reported, that you were equally scathing about the policy, using words that I can't repeat on the family programme, but were adjacent to mental.
So this is what Yvette Cooper has alleged that I've said. Now, she has a vested interest in undermining
it doesn't matter.
the policy.
Is it true?
And she hasn't. And the point is, she's never given any indication of where I said it, who I said it to.
The one person who knows whether you said it or not is you.
Yeah,
did you or not?
No. And the point I've made is where I have expressed frustration, when I have expressed frustration about the policy, is at times I felt there was a focus on that to the exclusion of everything else. And the Rwanda policy is important, but it was always part of a toolkit of responses to this, including the returns agreements that we have with a number of countries, including Albania, including the creation of the Small Boats Operation Command, which Yvette Cooper, I think, is going to recreate. So her headline
Border
policy...
Security Command.
Exactly. So the Border Security Command already exists, is already commanded by a former British Army general. She's the fact that no one talks about immigration enforcement, who actually, dozens of people every week leave the country on flights, and she's going to recreate that with the returns unit, which already exists.
Okay, let's...
And so my frustration is that we weren't talking about the full toolkit that we were using, which is perhaps why Yvette Cooper doesn't seem to understand these things already exist.
Yeah, you haven't got any flights off, by the way, have you? So...
Yes, we have, actually.
Oh, really?
Yes, we have. Aha, that caught you out, isn't it?
It has.
So the point is, so we have...
I'm not talking about the people who volunteer to go.
So
you haven't got the scheme working.
Because the point being is that is part of the proof of concept. That is part of the planned approach to demonstrate that the Rwanda end of the system is ready, that the hosting environment is ready, the fact it is a safe country for asylum seekers, which we already knew because, of course, the United Nations uses Rwanda for asylum processing. So the point being is I have continued, whilst the election campaign has carried on, I have continued going into the Home Office regularly, making sure we are still on track to deliver those flights to Rwanda after the election. The only way that that's going to be stopped is if people put a Labour government who will scrap it, even though the deterrent effect is already working.
I'll let you go on about Rwanda, but let's get back to the campaign, if we may. Prime Minister talked 2 weeks ago about the moral mission of your government to reform welfare. Let's talk about morality. Is it a sign of the Conservative Party's moral decay that some of your colleagues were more interested in stuffing their own pockets by gambling on the date of the election than on helping hard-pressed families hit by the cost of living?
Well, I'm not in any way going to defend people that placed bets on that. There is an investigation by the Gambling Commission, and we have been, told very, very clearly that we are not to discuss the investigations. But the broad point is that
what you do know is that it's not just one or two people.
But as I say, look,
this is pretty thoroughgoing. There's a lot of them. As far as one can make
that's
it.
That's not my understanding.
There are a bunch of investigations.
No, that's not my understanding. My understanding is that it is a small number of individuals.
Well, and a small number of very highly placed individuals.
But as I say, look, I'm not defending the actions. It is inappropriate, but the Gambling Commission has got a role to play. It is playing that role. We have been told that we should not discuss the details of this investigation, and so I'm going to abide by the instructions of the Gambling Commission.
OK. You're confident, by the way, that none of your colleagues was involved in any of this? Your cabinet colleagues?
Well, as I say, I've got no reason to believe any of them were at all. As I say, the Gambling Commission has made it very, very clear we are not meant to discuss this, and so I'm going to abide by their instructions.
I'll tell you what's really puzzling here. The Gambling Commission can do what it wants to do, but the Prime Minister claims to be furious. But he says it's all got to go through this process. Why doesn't he, like any other employee might do in this situation, call in the alleged offenders, ask them, did you place a bet or did you not place a bet? The answer is binary. It's either yes or no. And if the answer is yes, sack them.
Because that's the Gambling Commission's role and responsibility.
No, he's the Prime Minister. These people work for him. He can do whatever he wants. He can just say, if it were you, he'd say, James, tell me the truth. Did you or did you not? Well, and you, being an honest man, would say yes or no.
Well, the example of Craig Williams. Craig has said what he did and has put himself into the hands of the investigators at the Gambling Commission. So I don't know what other conversations have been had. As I say, I don't necessarily know the process in detail, but the Gambling Commission is the appropriate body for this. Okay. They have said they're investigating, and they've also said that it's inappropriate for us to comment on what is a live investigation.
This is so weird. The man is the Prime Minister. He doesn't get told what to do by the Gambling Commission.
No, actually, Trevor, that's completely the opposite. The whole point of our system is that as politicians,
no
one puts themselves above. No one puts themselves above the law. No one puts themselves above the appropriate authority to investigate this. And the Gambling Commission is the appropriate authority. They are conducting an investigation, and we are abiding by the instructions of the investigation.
This is not the law. It's not a criminal thing. Look, the point is this. This plays into a narrative that started with parties in Downing Street. It ran through allegations of dodgy deals on PPE with ministers' pals. And now you end up with Tory officials in the bookies, and the Prime Minister saying, oh, I can't do anything about this, while the rest of the nation looks on, suffers, can't do any of this. Isn't that why you are losing voters? Because actually, every time one of these things happens, you guys come in and you say, oh, nothing to do with us. So, we can't do anything about it.
So what would you prefer? That we ignored due process? That we...
There is no due process.
Well, no, there is. The Gambling Commission is conducting an investigation,
and we are ensuring... And we are ensuring... morally wrong. Why doesn't he just do something about it? He is the boss.
Well, the appropriate thing to do is for the appropriate investigating authority to conduct that investigation. These structures are there for a reason. It is the right thing to do, and I'm quite sure that you would be very, very critical if we said, look, we are going to circumvent these organisations. We're not going to engage with these organisations.
I can give you a straight answer.
We're not going to do this. We are just going to deal with this in-house.
I can give you a very straight answer to that. I wouldn't be critical. I'd say, okay, fine.
No, Trevor, I'm going to pull you up on this, because if we did a purely internal piece of investigation and we said nothing to see here, everyone moved on, you would say, why didn't you take it to... hang on. Why didn't you take it to the Gambling Commission? Why have you done that? The point is, James, these independent bodies exist for a reason. They are doing the appropriate work, and we are letting them do their work.
Look, the reason I raise this is because all of this speaks to the Prime Minister's character and the way he carries himself, what he's telling the public. He is at the moment fighting a campaign where actually his biggest albatross problem is not so much the opposition, but your party's own recent history, the moral failings of Boris Johnson, the economic misjudgments of Liz Truss. Let's not go back over that, but let me just ask you, because this might be your last chance to be clear about this. What kind of Conservative Party would we be voting for? Would you, let's make it very specific, would you personally want to serve in a Conservative administration that included either Boris Johnson or Liz Truss?
Well, look, I'm not going to I'm not going to say I'm not going to work with other Conservatives. Of course I work with other Conservatives. And that's not to say that I agree with every decision that either Liz or Boris made. Of course not. And there have been criticisms.
But given
and actually, in both cases, in both of those people that you spoke about, the Conservative Party, members of the Conservative Party took action when it was felt the decisions that those people made.
And my point
that's the point. No, but that's the point. And so, look, this election is about making sure that we remind people what is at stake here. And of course, I completely get that their voters will have frustrations with the Conservative Party. I completely get that. I completely understand why. But also, what people need to recognise is that the alternative is a party led by a man who tried to make Jeremy Corbyn a prime minister. No, but this
because I know but the point is you said this before.
Because if your argument is about judgment and character, Keir Starmer has U-turned over and over again on the commitments he made to his own party. He's basically been dishonest to his own party. So what does that indicate his relationship with the country will be?
All right, I'm asking
trying to make Corbyn. You talk about former leaders.
I'm asking
Trevor,
about the Conservative Party.
About judgment of former leaders. But elections are about choices.
I get that.
And the choice is between Rishi, who was critical of the behaviour of former leaders, or Keir Starmer, who tried to make Jeremy Corbyn Prime Minister twice. Despite knowing his history,
you said it. Everybody's heard it.
Well,
let me ask you
about
that's not the only choice that's open to voters, particularly voters on the centre right. It's entirely plausible, whatever the outcome of this election, the centre right's going to have to regroup. One choice is Nigel Farage. Does he have, do you think, a part to play in the future of the Conservative Party?
Well, I've said this before. He has said over and over again his motivation is complete toxicity towards the Conservative Party, and I cannot see...
As it currently is.
Well, I cannot see...
He hasn't said he would never rejoin the Conservative Party. He hates the Conservative Party as it currently is. So my point is, in the future, can you see Nigel Farage...
the short answer is no, I can't. Okay. Now, if he goes on a political journey, well, that's up to him. But as it stands at the moment, we are seeing things that are being said by members of the Reform Party at every level, which I think are completely against the principles and philosophy. One of my proudest functions in government is our support for Ukraine and its self-defence against Russia's brutality. I'm very proud of the role that we played in the Second World War, defending freedom and democracy. And when we see comments coming out of that party, which are kind of echoing Putin's lines, saying that Churchill should have appeased Hitler, I cannot envisage how attitudes like that have any home in the Conservative Party now or in the future.
You're comparing Nigel Farage to some very dangerous figures in British history. Would you say that Nigel Farage is a danger?
No, that's not what... No, that's not... No, you're trying to put words in my mouth there. What I've said is the things that he and others have said, both about the Conservative Party and about world affairs, means that they are. I cannot see how it can be a natural home for them in the Conservative Party.
All right.
We are passionate about our defence of democracy and freedom, both historically and in the here and now. Okay. And that just feels at odds with a lot of things.
If I may, I just want to ask you one last question. Some of your colleagues are talking about the election as a foregone conclusion. But even if you don't take that point of view, some people think that the voters might be persuaded if they thought that there would be a different kind of leadership in the Conservative Party. Major issue that could motivate right-leaning voters is the right sort of leader. Are you up for it?
Look, I've said my focus is on getting myself and my colleagues re-elected. I want to try and make sure you get enough MPs to form a Conservative majority. If that isn't the case, then we will deal with the circumstances as we find that. We want to make sure that, you know, if we do have to hold the Labour Party to account, we'll do so. But look, my instinct is that leader of the opposition, I know what you're hinting at, leader of the opposition is not a job people should aspire to. Being in government is a job people aspire to. And look, I've made that clear that I want to make sure we get as many Conservatives elected.
Okay, I'm not hearing a no. James Clovelly, thank you very much indeed.
Trevor, thank you.
Well, let's see what our panel made of all that. We're joined all morning by the former editor of the Financial Times, Lional Barber, the former Labour advisor, Sonia Sodha, and the former Number 10 Communications Director, Guto Harri. Guto, I noticed that James unusually was not wearing a tie, which to me is a signal of, I'm out of here. But can anything else go wrong for the Conservatives?
First of all, on the tie, he's a hunky guy. He's just done a big push-up challenge and he's in great shape. And it's a Sunday morning, so it's a sign of how breezily relaxed he is.
Great line. That's 3% on the poll.
And I'm very fond of him. And he put on a good show there, because waking up to find out that yet another senior Conservative is accused of placing bets is tragic, shall we say. And the only thing you've got to do at some point is sort of laugh a little bit. I saw a cartoon on Friday that had Rishi Sunak going to the bookie saying £100 on the Prime Minister resigning on the 5th of July. And that is the sort of brave face on it. It's a mystery to me why this is left hanging. And I am passionate about due process. And in general, I will defend people hesitating to sack someone without due process. But on this occasion, it's quite straightforward. Did you know, did you place a bet? If the answer is yes. Did you know for a fact when you placed a bet that there was going to be an election? That is black and white. That's not even a grey area. And I think with some of the people involved, they would have been in a position to know. And so it's a slam dunk.
Is he just... I mean, it's hard to understand. Is he just wrong? I mean, what's going on in Rishi Sunak's head?
It is hard to sort of fire someone who's worked very, very closely and loyally for you, and it's not easily done, and most people aren't presented with that in any walk of life. But in politics, it has to be done. And there are people, without naming them, who should be punished at this point with a sort of summary justice, and it's not happening. And because of that, it sort of hemorrhages support, and it allows you to carry on about, wider themes.
Lionel, have you seen anything like this before in your career?
No, we had a phrase called an agreed departure, and that is where somebody comes in, you present a kind of direct question, and if you don't get the right answers, well, I think it's best that you leave. So it's not even a sacking. Here, what is missing is the firm smack of leadership. You asked, Trevor, what is going on in Rishi Sunak's head? I think it's a little like a boxer who's been through 3 rounds. The head is very cloudy. He means well, but he really should have acted on this, because the wider point, Trevor, you made it, is that this shows that the moral compass in the Conservative Party does not exist. These are privileged insiders who had information, and they're going down to the bookies and making a flutter. I mean, please. It's terrible. And by the way, it fits a pattern.
Is there any possibility that you can imagine, Sonia, that they can at least stem the tide?
No. You started off by asking, can things get worse? And the answer to that is obviously they can. We've got the Gambling Commission who've launched this investigation. There may be other names implicated in this. We do not know, but there may be other names to come out. And so the story can obviously get worse. I think it's a story that's going to tick on whether there are more names or not. I think the real question for Rishi Sunak is, you've got a police officer implicated in this. There are allegations being investigated. The police have suspended him pending that investigation. Why won't Rishi Sunak do the same with Conservative officials and candidates? And I think another question for Rishi Sunak is, what does this say about his leadership? When he was asked about this last week, he said, I'm angry, I'm very angry. It was almost like he was a victim in this. But what he's got to face up to is, when you're leading a government, when you're leading a company or a charity, when things like this happen that throw into question, the moral compass of those who work for you, it is also a reflection on your leadership.
Guto, in a way, he is the inheritor of a story. I mean, and the story goes back through the PPE scandal, it goes back through the parties and all of that. Just by the by, I gather that you were at the former Prime Minister's 60th birthday party last night. How was it?
It was great, but I'm not going to get into that. And where I part company with my distinguished colleagues here is there are marginal figures who've behaved badly. But if you look at the core of what this government has offered and what Conservative governments have offered, I don't think anyone thinks that the Foreign Secretary is corrupt or that the Home Secretary is corrupt or nor incompetent, nor that we have a Chancellor of the Exchequer who is incompetent, nor indeed a sort of Prime Minister. So if you look at what's on offer, it would be bad to go into the polling booth and say, I'm not going to vote Conservative, I'm going to choose an alternative plan because some very obscure guy who handled the backbenches for Rishi Sunak actually was mad enough, stupid enough, or as we say in Welsh, tupsin, Craig Williams is a tupsin, went and placed the bet. That is not the proposal for the next 5 years. And anyone who makes a bad decision about the choices facing the government on the basis of that is actually underserving themselves.
That's a very valiant effort for you, but these are people working in CCHQ, leading the campaign.
Conservative Party headquarters.
Not taking decisions.
It's the Prime Minister's own parliamentary secretary.
OK.
Who's a bag carrier? That's the other description.
Let's widen this a bit. I mean, let's not dance on people's graves, but let's widen this a bit. I think the big issue, which seems to be emerging, aside from reform, which we'll come back to later, is that there's a general loss of faith in politics as a solution. One of the things that we've been tracking over time is the combined Conservative and Labour vote. And I want you to have a look at this. Last week, I said that this was the lowest since 1918, this combined vote. It is now lower. It is the lowest combined vote for Labour and Conservatives that there has ever been. Lionel, what's this telling us?
It's telling you that the traditional parties are struggling to hold on to voters. Now, in Britain, we're actually in better shape than on the continent. If you see what's happening in France, revolutionary France, where there is no centre, it's evaporated. Macron's movement's disappeared, and you've got the hard left and hard right. In Germany, you've got a story of fragmentation, populist parties in Italy, Spain, all this. What we're seeing is a little bit of that with Mr. Farage. I would like to see where we are on polling day and then also see how many actually seats does he get, because we have a system which protects us against this. But the larger message, Trevor, is you're right. There isn't a great enthusiasm for Starmer compared to Blair, or there's some hesitancy, shall we say, and a general disaffection with the mainstream parties.
Indeed, and by the way, I'm probably getting a little bit overexcited. It is lower, the lowest since before 1918. I don't think we've gone right back.
Yeah, you don't look too excited.
We haven't gone right back to the beginning of the Labour Representation Committee to check it, but in serious politics, it's worse it's ever been. And actually, here we are on the poll tracker. Labour is drifting a little bit down. Conservatives drifting a little bit down. And Reform and the Greens and Liberal Democrat are picking up some of that. But Sonia, is there a danger that the middle of politics is gradually being hollowed out here?
I mean, I don't think that's true if you look at what's predicted to happen and if you look at what Keir Starmer's Labour Party stands for. And let's not forget that the projections are that he wins an incredibly healthy majority, bigger than Blair's 1997 majority. And don't think there's any question. I mean, there is a clear trajectory there. He's moved the Labour Party under Jeremy Corbyn, a 2019 free broadband for all manifesto to a party where he wants to be known as a man who's offering incrementalism to the country.
With a Chancellor who says no.
Well, exactly. So I think it would be preliminary to sort of say that the centre is dropping out of British politics. I do think, though, that speaking to some of the points that Lionel was making, nobody who's been on the campaign trail can deny that there is a sort of general anti-politics sentiment in the country. I think people have lost the faith that politicians may be able to deliver positive change. I think that's partly about where the economy is. The country's feeling much more pessimistic than it was in the run-up to 97. But that's what I think this sort of falling vote share is. People are less likely to vote for one of the two main governing parties because they're not sure they can deliver.
I want to come back to this after we've heard Sharon Graham's interview, because she touches on this at the end of our conversation. It is now 9 o'clock. You are watching Sunday Morning with Trevor Phillips. The Home Secretary has told this programme that he was surprised to see the news that a former aide of his had described the government's Rwanda policy as crap. James cleverly said he couldn't defend the actions of Conservative officials accused of betting on the general election date. Well, there's still plenty to stick around for this morning, possibly with cleaner language. Shortly, we'll hear from the Shadow Education Secretary, Bridget Phillipson, plus the Unite General Secretary, Sharon Graham, who's putting the Labour government on notice with a stark warning, and that's before it's even been elected. And the former Immigration Minister, Robert Jenrick, on the future of the Conservative Party. A little earlier, I spoke to the Shadow Education Secretary and Labour candidate for Houghton and Sunderland South, Bridget Phillipson. Bridget Phillipson, Labour's promise is change. Well, Rachel Reeves promises growth, but that doesn't happen tomorrow. Now, this morning, Sharon Graham tells this programme that your decision to stick to the Tory fiscal rules in next Parliament is just wrong. It's the opposite of change, that you will either have to borrow more, tax more, or cut more. She's right, isn't there, that actually at the heart of your programme there isn't any change from the Tories?
No, I don't accept that. I mean, Sharon Graham has an important job to do in representing her members, and I do respect what she has to say. But what we saw under the Conservatives was what comes of playing fast and loose with the public finances, and it's working people who pay the price. They're paying more on their rent and their mortgage every single month because of Liz Truss and that cavalier approach they took. And we will not be taking that approach. As Rachel Reeves has set out, stability in the economy is absolutely central. And getting growth back, if we'd had anywhere near the level of growth we had under the last Labour government, or even compared to other OECD countries in recent years, then we would have more money to invest in our public services. And that's why growth, where it comes to building more houses, investing in skills, making that transition around green energy, will drive forward our country and will create lots more highly skilled jobs.
That may be true, but growth isn't going to happen immediately. Houses don't spring up overnight. People don't get trained in a couple of weeks. So you are going to have to spend some time getting there. And it's not Liz Truss's policies you're following, it's Jeremy Hunt and Rishi Sunak's. So where is the change?
Well, Jeremy Hunt's manifesto he's disavowed himself from in terms of how they're paying for it. It's another wish list full of unfunded commitments. Our manifesto has got a clear
you're doing
plan.
exactly what he said. Every time you have a go at Jeremy Hunt, you're having a go at Rachel Reeves.
No, our plan has got a clear sense around how we will drive the long-term growth and change that we need to see across our country.
Your numbers are exactly the same.
But with some really important first steps that we would get to work on from day one, whether that's more teachers, more police officers cracking down on antisocial behaviour. But let's be clear, none of this can be taken for granted. You know, people shouldn't look at the polls and think this is a done deal. If people want change, if they want to turn the corner on 14 years of failure, then they've got to get out and vote Labour on the 4th of July.
Well, you say if people want change, but all right, well, let's break it down. Are you sure that there's going to be no borrowing that leaves our debt higher in 5 years? That's your promise, same as the Tories.
Rachel Reeves has set out ironclad fiscal rules about how we will make sure we've got a stable economy where we can drive growth and investment, working with the private sector and our trade unions too, who will be a really important part of how we create and deliver those jobs right across our country. But take education, for example. I think we've set out a really ambitious plan for how we will make sure that all of our children, starting when they're very young, get every chance to succeed in life.
I want to come to that, but let's just stick with the tax and fiscal policy. OK, so Rachel Reeves being clear. One thing she's not absolutely clear about is whether she's leaving open the option of raising extra revenue, for example, for education, through capital gains tax, property taxes, like council tax or inheritance tax. There are no commitments on any of that in your manifesto. I couldn't find them anyway. So, are those options still open?
Rachel Reeves is not interested in tax hikes. What we're focused on is
Are
growth.
those options still open?
Our manifesto makes absolutely clear that there will be no increases in national insurance, VAT or income tax. It's under the Conservatives that we see tax levels at a 70-year high, and working people are paying ever more and getting ever less in return. Everything in our manifesto is fully funded and fully costed, so we do not need to consider such measures in order to deliver on the plan that we have set out.
Well, you say you don't need it, but your wise old bird, Neil Kinnock, your former leader, says you need to give yourself some wiggle room, so it's quite a good idea to leave open the options of capital gains tax, property taxes and council tax and all of that. If Rachel Reeves says she's not going to need it, why don't you just pledge you're not going to raise those taxes?
Because all of our commitments in that manifesto have got a plan behind them that don't require us, other than in the discrete measures that we've set out, whether that's VAT on private schools, non-dom tax status, ending that. Everything we've said has got a plan behind it. Our instincts are not around taxes, it's on growth. Our focus and the laser-like focus a Labour government will bring will be on growing our economy. We know that it's through wealth creation and through growth that we will deliver the living standards increases and the jobs across our country that we absolutely have to focus on.
Well, in that case, don't pretend you're thrilled by this, because that means that actually Rachel Reeves is not going to give you any extra money for education over and beyond the things you've already got for breakfast clubs and so on. So actually what you're talking about now is serious cuts.
With education, you will see real and significant change under a Labour government if people go out and vote for it. More nursery places within our primary schools, more breakfast clubs, universal free breakfast clubs across our primary schools, and investment in skills, reforming the failed apprenticeship levy, turning it into a growth and skills levy so that everyone right throughout their working lives has the chance to get on. That's big, that's ambitious, that's far more than the Conservatives are saying, but none of this can be taken for granted, and people shouldn't look at the polls and think, this is a done deal. If they want that change, they need to make sure they get out and vote for it. Because I've been across the country, there's a lot of people that have still not made up their minds in this election. And in those seats, a couple of hundred votes will be the difference between a Labour government or 5 more years of the Conservatives.
Are you genuinely worried that you're not going to get the vote out, that you're not going to win? I mean, what are you hearing that we're not hearing?
I speak to a lot of people who've yet to make their minds up in the seats where we need to win. But what the Tories are doing, very, very cynically, is a voter suppression strategy. They want people to think this is all in the bag, don't worry about it, you don't need to come out and vote. And worse than that, I think it's an attempt to distract from their manifesto, which, if they got the chance to implement that, would crash the economy just like Liz Truss did.
Are you telling me that Labour supporters are being a bit complacent, that they're all going to go on holiday?
No, I just want people to know that if they want change, the only way to get it is to vote for it.
All right, just to come back on the issue of the money. Your colleague, Wes Streeting, sat here last week and said that, yeah, we're going to stick to the plan, but if there's money available, I want it in health. Do you want to make your pitch now that that not all the money is going to go down Wes Streeting's throat and some could come to education?
Well, the record of the last Labour government was that we were able to invest in our schools and hospitals because of the record that we had on growth.
I'm talking about the next Labour government where there is no money. They're going to have to make a choice.
Labour governments
is it Wes or is it you who's going to get the money?
I don't accept that for 1 second. Labour governments will always seek to ensure that our public services get the support that they need, but growth is central to that. But there are lots of commitments that we have set out already that would make a really big difference in education, such as more childcare places, such as universal free breakfast clubs in our primary schools.
OK. Your manifesto promises to develop an ambitious strategy to reduce child poverty. That's your territory. Why don't you start with something that's not that ambitious, given you haven't got that money, and get rid of the 2-child cap on benefits?
Look, I understand the arguments around this, and part of why I came into politics was because I feel very strongly that we cannot have high levels of child poverty in our country. It damages not just the life chances of individual children and families, but it makes our country poorer. The next Labour government, if we win the trust of the British people, will have a real focus on bearing down on those levels of child poverty, and we will work across government to do that. But some of the measures that we've set out, for example, universal free breakfast clubs, would make a big difference to families, but also would make sure that our children are getting into school, are having a good start to their day, and it would drive up academic standards, as well as providing really important support to families during this cost of living crisis. You
know that from your own background, it's not always as straightforward as that. And the money actually matters. So if you can't get benefits for your third child, it makes a huge difference. And the reason this is important is not just in itself, but it's an indication of what a Labour government might be like, because the truth is, actually, you could, for example, decide to unfreeze fuel duty, and that would provide you with the £3.5 billion that you would need to lift the two-child cap. You've actually made a choice. You're going to keep motorists where they are and help them out, but not help families with more than 2 children. That's a choice.
Look, I wish that we could wave a magic wand and
It's not a magic wand. You've made a choice. You could.
I wish that we could wave a magic wand and right every wrong of the last 14 years. This was a Conservative policy that we did not support. But I cannot sit here today and say to you, we can fix every problem or we can make commitments in every area, because stability in the economy is important, and it is working families, including those who are currently experiencing poverty, who are paying ever more. When you've got a government that plays fast and loose with the public finances, we need to return stability to the economy. But absolutely, a Labour government will put right at its heart the need to tackle and bear down on those numbers where it comes to child poverty. I see it every day in my community. I know the impact it has. I wish that we could commit to more, but it's just not possible. And we have to be upfront with the British people about the tough choices that we will face after 14 years of failure.
Well, you say you have to be upfront with the British public. I mean, this is, in some ways, part of the Labour problem, that people say that they're not absolutely sure what they might be getting if Labour comes into government. On a separate front, for example, J.K. Rowling says that Labour remains dismissive and often offensive towards women fighting to retain their rights. And it's not entirely clear where Labour is on this. So let me just ask you a very specific question. Under Labour, will a biological woman know for sure that if she is in a women's prison or in a women's refuge or in a changing room, that she will not have to share any of those spaces with a person who is not biologically a woman?
Yes, because the Equality Act allows for that. But what we have also said...
it allows for it.
I'll just...
Yeah.
We will also make sure that there is strengthened guidance that sets out the position so that service providers can have absolute confidence in the delivery of services. I do believe in the importance of single-sex provision, but I also believe that trans people have the right to appropriate care as well. I don't think it is about one or the other. I have a huge amount of respect for J.K. Rowling, and I recognise the important work that she's done over many years in raising the profile of violence against women. That's very personal to me as well. We had a very strong record when we were last in government, and an incoming Labour government has committed, if we win the trust of the British people, to halving violence against women and girls and making sure that we're cracking down on perpetrators who make the lives of women a misery.
I get all of that, but that's not actually the answer to the question, because the question where this arises is on the question of who decides whether you are a woman or not.
And that's why we will set out statutory guidance to make that absolutely clear.
What are you going to say? Are you going to say that somebody can decide and has the right to be treated as a woman if he decides that that's what he wants to be treated as, which is the self-ID point? You can't have it both ways on this.
So I recognise the importance of biological sex and what that means and the protections that then arise from that in terms of single-sex provision. But there are some people who make that transition to be in a different gender to the sex in which they were born.
This is absolutely not the point.
I can tell you absolutely that I think it is important that, for example, sexual violence services retain the right to deliver single-sex provision. I genuinely don't think I could be any clearer on that point.
You could be. You could be. You could say very clearly that somebody cannot identify as a woman simply on their own say-so, and they must have...
That is our position set out in the manifesto. That is our position.
Certificate.
That is our position set out in the manifesto. We do want to make sure that trans people get the support that they need and that we move to a process that recognises, has a bit more humanity within it. But what I find frustrating about the way in which this is approached is that we have to do it from a position of recognising people's rights, absolutely, but not to make this a toxic culture wars discussion. This has to be about the dignity and rights of all people, including women who have a right to single-sex provision in hospitals, in women's refuges. But alongside that, Let's not make trans people a political football like the Conservatives have done in recent years. This should not be about headline grabbing. It's about making sure we have the right policy response.
Bridget Phillipson, thank you for your time this morning.
Thank you.
That was Bridget Phillipson. Now, a quick reminder that Politics at Jack and Sam podcast is out every day during the campaign. You can scan the QR code on your screen to listen and to subscribe. It's free wherever you get your podcast, and it's a great listen. That's how I know about politics. Now, back to our panel, Lional Barber, Sonia Sodha and Guto Harri. Sonia, I think Bridget Phillipson made a plausible case for Rachel Reeves' defence against Sharon Graham. But I think when she talked about tough choices, it seems to me either they aren't making a choice or they made a choice but they don't want to tell us. I mean, either you support motorists or you could decide you want to lift the two-child cap. It is an actual choice, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. And I think one of the things that people have found slightly frustrating about the Labour campaign, it's very intentional, is that they aren't quite levelling up with us about some of the tough trade-offs that the country faces when it comes to fiscal challenges. So, you know, I happen to agree with Bridget Phillipson that actually it is very difficult to do, as Sharon Graham says, and take on more debt at a time when interest rates are very high. It's very expensive for the government. But where that leaves you is that you need to make tough choices. And, you know, Labour are sort of trying to have their cake and eat it a little bit. They're saying, look, we're incremental. We're all about stability. You can trust us. And we are going to radically transform the country. So, for example, take that issue of child poverty. The two-child benefit cap is going to be a big issue in the next Parliament. And, you know, breakfast clubs, they're a great thing. They're a really good policy idea. They cannot alone make any, you know, significant headway into the issue of rising child poverty. Labour's going to have to do something different. So I do feel like they've got some good but quite incremental policies. They want to get known for their incremental policies, but they also want us to believe that their incremental policies are going to fundamentally change the country. And it's very hard to square that circle.
You getting any clearer, Lionel?
I don't need to be, Trevor, because it's all going to change after the election. Let's give a little bit of sympathy for Keir Starmer, who's trying to win an election campaign, having been wiped out in 2019 and not been in power for a very long time, since 2010. So, here's a prediction, OK? Am I allowed to make a prediction?
Make a prediction.
OK.
Predict
so, OK, August, you're going to see an interest rate cut from the Bank of England, maybe a hawkish cut, 0.5%, and maybe more in the coming, right? That is going to change borrowing costs. Number two, they come into government and they say, oh, my God, this is the state of it. So they're going to change the fiscal rules.
It's so much worse than we thought.
No, yes, and Rachel Reeves will make an autumn statement where things will become a lot clearer. And last prediction, you may even get a relief rally, because after the incompetence that we've seen, bar Jeremy Hunt, by the way, who's done a good job, of many of the last few years, the markets will say, actually, this is a whole lot better. Okay. There's some tax questions which I can come to.
So the new government's basically, while the Conservatives are going to be tearing themselves apart, the new government's going to be going, happy days are here again.
So the appetite for self-harm of the Parliamentary Conservative Party is the reason why the polls are where they're at. It's not because of a genuine change of policy. It's the exact opposite. It's continuity. Jeremy Hunt has brought inflation down from 11% to 2% with Rishi Sunak. And so if Rachel Reeves is coming in saying 11% is too high, I need to bring it down, great. She's not. She's going to come in and inflation is already where it needs to be. If she was going to do something interesting with taxes, no, she's saying we'll be just as Tory as the Tories are. We won't put up your income tax. We won't put up it. No wonder people on the left are frustrated. They wait 14 years for Labour government, and by the time that Labour government is knocking on the door of number 10, it's ruling out virtually everything that people would want from a Labour government. So you get the Tories, but without the sort of the veneer of all this scandal and chaos.
OK, well, the economics of this is that we have to pay for this programme. So we're going to go to a break, but I want to come back to talk to you about the J.K. Rowling thing in part 4. Up next, the boss of the country's biggest union has a stark warning for the Shadow Chancellor and the Labour Party.
I don't agree with Rachel Reeves in terms of what has been said about the plans on growth. Because whilst we all want growth, I want growth, I think everybody would want growth, we are going to have to borrow to invest.
There's always more to the news than a headline. We want to discover, to delve a little deeper, to find out what's really going on. Explanation, analysis, the people at the heart of every story. I'm Neil Patterson, and this is the Sky News Daily Podcast. Alex Crawford joining us now from Ukraine.
Their personal possessions are all scattered around the place.
Our economics and data editor, Ed Conway, try and make sense of the big numbers for us.
Things can change incredibly quickly, and that's what they have done.
So, by the end, we'll hopefully all understand what's going on in the world just that little better. Available wherever you get your podcasts.
We've got your Sunday mornings covered. From the front page and the sounds of the streets to the voices of the people who make the major calls and big picture politics beyond Westminster. We'll put you at the heart of our story. A new start to Sunday. I'm ready. Are you? Join me, Trevor Phillips, Sunday mornings on Sky News. The battle lines are already being drawn for a future Labour government. The General Secretary of the Unite Union, UK's biggest, which is a major backer of the party, says the Shadow Chancellor must borrow and spend more to fix the country's problems. Sharon Graham has told this programme that Rachel Reeves has to loosen the fiscal straitjacket she's created and has a stark warning for what might happen if she doesn't. Sharon Graham, can we just get one thing clear? Do you actually want Labour to win this election with a big majority?
Yes,
absolutely. Of course I want Labour to win the election with a big majority. I mean, I'm a Labour Party member, but I'm also a trade union leader. And my first job, first and foremost, is to defend workers. That is the job that I have, to defend workers. And I will do that to the best of my ability. And so sometimes we disagree. And I think when you disagree, people have to be big enough just to allow those disagreements to happen. Nobody thinks that everybody agrees all the time in terms of the movement. And of course, I have come out very strongly because I'm defending workers on two core things: fire and rehire, and also on the oil and gas industry and the lack of a plan for the oil and gas industry. And I've also spoken very, very clearly about growth and what's happening about growth. So, yes, of course, I want them to win. I'm asking my members to vote Labour. I'm voting Labour. But that does not mean that you have to agree to every single thing. And it does not mean that you say, look, actually, you're wrong in this situation. And I think you need to do something slightly different.
Well, let's talk about each of those in turn. But before we get to that, how did it feel to be in the so-called Clause 5 meeting where you agree the manifesto and to be the only person in the room who wasn't going, yay, let's go for it?
Well, look, you know, I was the minority of one. I will absolutely be clear on that. But my job is to defend workers. And if I see in a manifesto, which was good things in there, let's be really clear, I want Labour to win. There were good things in the manifesto about steel, about industrial policy, the workers' rights piece. There are good things there. But when I'm looking at a manifesto and I can see that fire and rehire is not an outright ban, and I can see that oil and gas workers, whilst there are things in there around moving to net zero, everybody wants to do that, but you cannot allow oil and gas workers to become the coal miners of this generation. I won't allow that to happen, and because of that, I could not endorse the manifesto.
Well, it sounds like what you're saying is the manifesto essentially let down your members. Is this the beginning of the good old Labour tune, betrayal?
No, actually, it's actually normal negotiations. You know, I negotiate with big business all the time. You know, I try to put stuff forward, we try to get deals. And in the real world, people disagree.
This is very old school of you, isn't it? I mean, these days, Labour trade unions are Labour trade unions rather than trade unions.
Well, look, I think, you know, in the recent past, you couldn't see where Labour ended and the trade union began. And for me, and when I stood to be General Secretary of Unite, I made it really clear that my job was to defend jobs, pay and conditions of workers. And that's what I've done. We've had over 1,000 disputes in 2 years, covering 200,000 members, and we've had double-digit pay rises, £430 million back into the pockets of workers. My job is to defend workers. I'll do it unashamedly. Yes, there are times when people might not like that, but that is the job that I've got, and that's what I will do. And in that room, I had 1.1 million members when I put my hand up to say that actually we weren't going to endorse that manifesto. And I will do that every single time because that's the job that I've got.
Well, let's talk about what you might face with an actual Labour government if they, as they say, have the privilege to be elected. Angela Rayner says that on the oil and gas industries, where the pledge is not to agree any new exploration in the North Sea, she says that they will create, 100,000 green jobs, and that you're just fussing about your members' jobs and you don't really understand what they're trying to do.
Yeah. Well, I've negotiated for 35 years, Trevor. Use it for restructure. That's exactly what British Airways did to 36,000 workers. That means it's not a ban. If you ban it, no ifs, no buts, you cannot use it. On oil and gas, I'm really clear. You cannot let go of one rope before you've got hold of another rope. And what we need to see in terms of oil and gas is that we need to see a proper plan with investment behind it. There's no point saying we're going to create jobs, but you're not going to show where the money is to create those jobs. Now, I've put forward a very detailed plan in terms of what it would cost and those jobs.
Angela says she's got a plan. Haven't you seen it?
Well, of course, I've seen the words on the page, but, you know, we all know, do we not, that if you are going to move from oil and gas to renewables, you need to put in an infrastructure. Wind power is what you would be looking at. That would cost £6.6 billion, £1.1 billion for the next 6 years, and that investment needs to be there. You cannot just magic up jobs. It doesn't work like that. You need an infrastructure, you need supply chains, you need training, you need all of those things to happen. And I said in the Clause 5 meeting that when I'm talking to my members, we often have a discussion. What are these green jobs? Is someone driving an electric bike for Deliveroo? Is that one of these green jobs? We need to make sure these are proper jobs, commensurate with the jobs effectively that have been there.
But in the end, an agreement to some extent has to rely on trust. It sounds to me like what you're saying is you're ready to negotiate, you can see their position, but you don't accept it. But that actually underlying it, you're not absolutely sure that you trust these people.
Well, I wouldn't say that. I mean, what I would say is that there's a huge amount that's been done on steel, for example, on workers' rights, for example, a whole raft of things where clearly the negotiations got us to a position. I was part of those negotiations, and that's a good thing. And I'm going to say again, Trevor, because it is important, we need a Labour government. But that does not mean that we shouldn't also have discussions about what the future looks like. We need to borrow to invest.
Well, this is very interesting because Rachel Reeves says growth is actually at the centre of Labour's plans. Do you think her plans are credible?
Well, look, I don't agree with Rachel Reeves in terms of what has been said about the plans on growth. Because whilst we all want growth, I want growth, I think everybody would want growth, we are going to have to borrow to invest. Look, if you look at other countries, in France, their debt to GDP is 112%. In America, where the economy is growing, it's 130% debt to GDP. Ours is around about 99%. We have wiggle room. Give Britain a break. Give us a break. I mean, these people that are out there in communities and the workers, they are literally hurting beyond anything that you could comprehend. And what we need is we need to straitjacket off a little bit, get some wiggle room there. Borrowing to invest is not the same as other borrowing. It's borrowing to invest. It's part of our balance sheet. Let's get that done. And if you don't do that, we'll be waiting too long.
But Rachel Reeves is essentially saying that Labour cannot afford to do that. Labour has to have credibility. So, you know, to take your metaphor of the wiggle room, she's put on the corset and she's not going to release the strings on this, is she?
Well, look, let's put it this way round. After the Second World War, our debt to GDP was 250%. 250%, and we built the NHS. We built the NHS, and we went on to be prosperous. There is wiggle room there, and I think it is right that
Rachel's wrong.
Say...
What you're saying is Rachel's wrong?
I don't agree with Rachel in terms of keeping to these phony fiscal rules. We do not have to keep to these fiscal rules in the way that we are doing. And actually, if you let the straitjacket off, we've done this in the past. If I just spoke about America, everyone keeps talking about America's growth. They are 130% debt to GDP. We're 99. Near 99. We have got wiggle room here. We've done it before. We can do it again. A 1945 Labour government did it before. Let's do that again.
Are you amongst those who is a bit disappointed by what is said to be Labour's lack of ambition?
Well, look, I think Labour have done some good things. You know, I don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater here because that would be ridiculous. They have done some good things, and I do believe they want to do good things. We have seen the country hurting. What I, of course, would like them to do, I do think they need to see that we must loosen the straitjacket that they are talking about fiscally, and we must borrow to invest. If we're going to have transition, we're going to need the money to do that.
Last question, then. In the end, if Keir Starmer gets the big majority that you say you want, why should he pay the blindest bit of notice to you?
Well, first of all, I think he will, because I meet Keir Starmer and he understands that I have got a job to do. I say many, many times in conversations with Labour, I am here to fight for workers. That is the primary job that I have. But also I think that if you put your fingers in your ears, if you put your fingers in your ears to workers, we could be walking ourselves down a line where those people go somewhere else to seek solace. There is one shot. There is one shot for Labour to get this right. We've seen the polls and how volatile the polls are. Less than 5 years ago, a short time ago, there was 80% majority for the Tories. That has now moved over completely. So there's one shot to get this right, because we can see that there may be difficulties ahead if that is not the case.
When you say there's somewhere else for them to go, where are you talking about? They're not going to go to Conservatives. Are you talking reform?
Well, we can already see. I mean, I don't think it was coincidence that Nigel Farage launched his manifesto in Merthyr Tydfil, one of the poorest parts of the UK. And I think Labour have got one shot. We can see the volatility of the electorate. One shot to really say to workers and communities, we are with you. We can see the pain that you're going through. And to say to them to wait for growth, it is not quick enough. They are on their knees. They need Labour to come in and put their arms around them. And I really want Labour to do that. They've done some fantastic things in the manifesto. I'm supporting Labour, but we need to do more.
Sharon Graham, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
Coming up, we'll look at the fault lines in the Conservative Party and what might happen after the election with former Immigration Minister Robert Jenrick. polls are clear and consistent. Labour is pretty likely to win the election and form the next government. And it will be catastrophic for the Conservatives. Tory cabinet ministers have already said as much, warning of a Labour supermajority. So what happens after the election? Who could take over from Rishi Sunak, and what would the Conservatives look like? Well, former Immigration Minister Robert Jenrick is in today's Mail on Sunday, and he says we've allowed ourselves to be distracted from the issues that matter. He joins me now. Let's talk about some issues that matter. And maybe one of the things that matters right now is that your article reads to me less like a general election article and more like the first shot in the campaign to be the next leader of the Conservative Party.
Well, no, Trevor, I'm here today because I care passionately about the Conservative Party and I want it to get the best possible result at the general election. And I've been spending weeks knocking on doors up in North Nottinghamshire, and I share the values and the concerns of Reform voters, but I'm here to deliver a warning to them that if they vote for anyone other than a Conservative at this general election, they risk, because of our electoral system, a supermajority of the Labour Party that means higher taxes, open borders, a ludicrous energy policy that will make them poorer, and it means ransacking our rural communities like the one that I represent. And I don't want to see that happen, and I don't believe they want to see it either. So they need to think carefully and act on their head, not their heart, or else they will get precisely the opposite of what they want for our country.
Forgive me interrupting you, but we do have to be careful not to talk about your constituency, otherwise we'd have to invite all your rivals on. But and we normally wouldn't invite a second leading Conservative on to the programme. We've had James Cleverly on already. But I do want to go back to this. Your article seems to me, and it's perfectly reasonable, to be talking about what is the future of the Conservative Party overall and what is the future of conservatism. Now, let me just start with this point. To be realistic about this, if your fight is really with Labour, I think a lot of Conservative colleagues who are right now, this minute, lacing up their boots to go door knocking, are wondering what you're doing talking to me instead of getting out on the doorstep.
Well, I have been on the doorstep every day since the election was called, but why I've come down from Nottinghamshire to be on your show today is because I want to deliver this warning to all of those small C Conservatives across the country, whether it's in the East Midlands where I represent or anywhere, frankly, across the United Kingdom, that if they vote for reform, they are going to usher in, I believe, not just a couple of years of harmful Labour government, but potentially a generation of hard left Labour rule where we will see higher taxes, undoubtedly, where we will see open borders and all the things that I've been campaigning on that I want to see the Conservative Party achieve will be set back. Untold damage will be done to our country. I can't let that happen, and that's why I want to deliver this message to people watching.
Before we go down that road, nobody's listening to you until you deal with the record of the Conservatives. And part of that record is, if you like, a morality question, which is why the gambling story has become such a big issue. In fact, I gather that Nick Mason, who's one of the senior individuals who is being investigated over this, is actually a councillor where you live, in Hertfordshire. Now, shouldn't you, first of all, be able to say to the public, before you get onto Labour's iniquities, that you repudiate both the Johnson era and the Truss era, which is the thing that you are currently being judged on? Why can't you just say, these people put us in this place?
Well, I don't know this individual. I don't live in Hertfordshire. But what they appear to have done is quite wrong. And I think the Prime Minister was absolutely right to say that they should be booted out of the Conservative Party. What I want to focus on is the future.
But nobody's going to hear you until you deal with the legacy of Boris Johnson and Liz Truss. So what do you want to say about them? Should Boris Johnson be back on the campaign trail for you or not, for example?
Yes, I think he should do. Boris paid a heavy price for what happened in the past, but Boris is one of the stars of the Conservative movement. He's a brilliant campaigner. a superb Conservative politician. And I think at this moment, the whole Conservative family needs to unite. We need to rally together. I know that Boris has been campaigning and supporting and providing endorsements to Conservative candidates. I think that's great. And I want to see him welcomed and encouraged to do more in this campaign and, in fact, in the future.
Well, this is a great... thank you for the clarity on that. But this is a very important, interesting point, because we've done some surveying and we've done some work. And actually, if you ask people why they're not voting Conservative, actually, Rishi Sunak is only part of the reason. And at least as big a reason is Boris Johnson and Liz Truss. So what you're saying is, let's get Boris Johnson back on the campaign trail. It's like saying to somebody who's said to you, you know what, thank you very much for the eggs, but I really hate eggs. And you say, OK, I'll give you double eggs. I mean, what is the Conservative Party aiming to sell to the public? Which Conservative Party are you actually trying to promote to the public?
Well, it's no secret that I've had disagreements with the current government. I resigned, after all, from the cabinet over immigration. But I do believe that we face a moment of peril now, because the choice at this election is between the Conservatives who do believe in lower taxes, in secure borders, in controlling and reducing migration. And of course, I know that there are anger and frustration in the country about some of those issues, and I want the party to be stronger on those. But the choice is between the Conservatives and a Labour Party who we know will increase taxes, who we know believe in open borders, who have a frankly ludicrous energy policy that's going to make people poorer and deindustrialise our country. I can't allow that to happen. That's why I'm encouraging all people who share my views, small c Conservatives, the length and breadth of the country, to come and support us, because the Conservative Party should be the natural home for reform voters.
OK. Robert Jenrick, thank you very much for your time this morning.
Thank you.
And here is the full list of candidates in Newark, where Robert Jenrick is standing. We'll be back with our panel next.
It's a very complex and mysterious condition. Quite often it's very difficult to diagnose. People get wrongly diagnosed. It's similar to certain other conditions. So it's great that they're making some progress. I doubt that it'll be very soon before lots of people are offered this test, because just think about it. Who would want suddenly to decide to find out whether they were likely to get Parkinson's or not? But I think it will be part of this whole effort to understand what's going on in the brain, what is causing those dopamine cells to die, and whether anything could be done about it. We are seeing a couple of very promising new drugs at the moment, but as you heard there, they're obviously being tested on people who have already got the condition. If you could test it on people who didn't have but were susceptible to the condition, that would be very interesting indeed. So I was on holiday with my wife, and I kept dragging my leg. And then in the September, I was on the BBC holding a cable up in a report on broadband on Jersey, and somebody did write in saying they'd noticed a tremor there, and I ought to get that seen, see a neurologist. And I had actually already made steps, but it kind of confirmed me in my suspicions that what was revealed a few months later, that yes, I did have Parkinson's disease. And there it was diagnosed by basically a consultant stretching my arms this way and that, making me walk around the office, doing various exercises, getting in and out of a chair, almost kind of a pretty crude test. And later that was confirmed by a scan, what's called a DAT scan. But so if a blood test, when you were showing symptoms, could make that process simpler, that too would be helpful. I'm 5 years in. The first three or 4 years seemed relatively good. I had a bad fall last year, which I don't think was to do with Parkinson's, but it took me down a step. So I'm now finding it a bit harder to walk. I've got more mobility problems, and there's other factors as well. I sleep terribly, and there are various things that are sort of what are called non-motor symptoms. But I'm on medication. I've got friends with whom I make this podcast. We get quite a lot of laughs out of it, as well as the odd moan. So I can't complain, really.
Back with our panel, Lional Barber, Sonia, Sodha and Guto, Harri. Guto, Robert Jenrick's really making a pitch for reform voters. And actually, the scale of what's happening, it's very interesting. I think we've got a graphic that we can show you as ever, which is the number of second places that reform is likely to take, which is, we can show the top 10 seats here, but there are about 120 seats, according to our MRP polling, where reform is going to come second. But you can see how well they are doing. This is, in a way, the disintegration of the centre-right, isn't it, Guto?
Yes, and he's exactly right to warn that a vote for reform is a vote for Labour, and what you achieve is the polar opposite of what you set out to achieve. So he's
well, to
right
be fair,
on that.
the reform can equally say a vote for the Tories is a vote for Labour because, you know, they're getting close.
Nobody should place a bet in the current context, but I would bet that, you know, the Conservatives end up with more seats than Reform. And the only contribution of Reform, and before them the Brexit Party, and before them UKIP, has been to sort of undermine the exact things that they want. They're the most destructive force, and frankly, they're a one-man band as well. So Jenrick was trying to make a pitch for, you know, something principled. All Reform is essentially is a vehicle for Nigel Farage and his, as we found out this weekend, deeply, deeply offensive view of the world and of Britain.
Yeah, well, you say a one-man band, but it's a one-man band that's been going for 25 years, that engineered Brexit, that has the Conservative
He has failed
Party
7 times to get a seat in
the fact that you have to
committee.
say there's a bet that they will get, the Conservative Party will get more seats than Reform, and nobody's laughing, says that something dramatic's happening, isn't it?
They are, at the moment, eating some of the Conservatives' breakfast, if you like. They've taken half the croissant that was meant to be mine out there, if you like. But to every Conservative, including Robert Jenrick, who had his hands on the levers of the immigration policy and chose to leave rather than stay there and try and sort it out, which is where, sorry, I lose credibility, he loses credibility with me. But in the end, the challenge for the Conservatives is coming not from the right, it's coming from the left. Okay. That's where the vote is going, and that's where the victory is going to be.
Lionel, moving on from an appropriately EU croissant metaphor on the anniversary of Brexit.
Croissant, a French word, yes.
I know, we're not supposed to use them. But do you think that what Jenrick is really highlighting is something, I don't want to use the word existential, but this is a very serious moment for the centre-right, isn't it?
Well, I was at a dinner party the other week where a prominent newspaper proprietor said we were witnessing the death of the Conservative Party before our eyes. I will not say who it was, but I was quite...
choice, is there?
Well, it was pretty eye-opening, and I think that's why you could see Robert Jenrick making a fairly desperate plea to reform. People who are minded, maybe to vote reform, come back into the fold. Of course, it's almost too late. By the way, just to say, to be clear, I do think we're talking about Conservative weakness rather than reform strength, because reform is not a party. It's a movement, and it's dominated by one person, and he hasn't won Clacton yet.
OK. Sonia, what do you make of it? Where do you think we are?
Well, I mean, I agree with Guto that it's, you know, the role that Reform are going to play in this election, I'm not talking about after the Parliament, is essentially to make it easier for Labour to win in Labour-Tory marginals. That is going to be the net effect, I think. But I think what's going to be interesting is what happens after the election if Nigel Farage does manage to win a seat in Clacton. Yes, he's tried 7 times, but actually the polls make it look like he could win. And then I think he could cause quite significant trouble for the Conservative Party. I'm not one of these people. I think it's very, very bad for the Conservatives. I'm not one of these people. I think it's a little bit early to say it's existential in the sense that we were writing off the Labour Party back in 2019 after its second worst defeat since the 1930s. I think first past the post really lends itself to the survival of the two main political parties, even when they are in pretty dire straits. But depending on what happens to the Conservatives after the next election, they could go rightwards, and Farage, if he gets into Parliament, might play a role in that. And that is going to do Keir Starmer no end of good.
Sonia, let's just return, if we may, to Bridget Phillipson's response on the J.K. Rowling essay newspapers yesterday, where she says that she doesn't think she can vote Labour. She has a poor opinion, her words, of Keir Starmer, particularly because of the Labour Party's, she uses the word prevarication, on gender. Do you think Bridget Phillipson got us any closer to clarity on this?
I think she actually struck a much more conciliatory tone than Keir Starmer did when he was asked about Rosie Duffield, one of his MPs, on Thursday night. So I thought tonally it was very good. There is it should be easy for Keir Starmer to say, look, I agree with Rosie that, Rosie Duffield, that how you define a woman matters to the provision of single-sex services. I get why women care about that, and the Labour Party stand for discrimination against trans people. He should have been able to say that on Thursday night, and I think, Bridget did that.
But he didn't.
Well, he didn't. The question, though, is when you come to policy and the actual conflict of rights. And Bridget Phillipson's position isn't really sustainable, the Labour Party position, because the Conservatives are saying you need to reform the Equality Act to make it clearer so that there's clear protections for single-sex services, spaces and sports. I've written a lot about this. Every expert lawyer that I've spoken to says that the Equality Act is unclear and it needs clarification. There is a whole constitutional case about this working its way through the courts because it's unclear. The Labour Party is just wrong to say it's not needed, and so that's where the difficulty in their position is.
Lionel, does any of this matter?
Well, it does matter because women who feel deeply aggrieved, and rightly so, when they go into a bathroom and then suddenly somebody looks as a man and they feel threatened, that's a problem, and self-identification is a problem. But I think the broader issue is the leadership, the political leaders, prepared to state clearly what the policy should be and not feel taken hostage by one pressure group or another. That really does matter.
Guto, 20 seconds. I should say, full disclosure, my old shop says that the Equality Act should be changed. This isn't going to help you at all, is it?
I think J.K. Rowling should be canonised and certainly given a peerage, which is more in the control of people, because she's been courageous and she's told the truth and she's been principled. And I think it raises questions, apart from the woke agenda and all that, it raises questions about the credibility of Keir Starmer as a man who 2 years ago couldn't tell us what a woman was, and now he thinks he can.
OK, that's it for this week's show. I'll be back next Sunday at 08:30. Watch Sophie and Ali all week.